everyone, and welcome to our usual Sunday talk within the Nine-Sided Circle. I'm one of your two hosts, Noor Kyle.
And I am the other one of your two hosts, Mushtaq Ali.
It
Almost
strikes
forgot my
me,
own name.
yeah, I don't even think we did our little
No.
introducing ourselves this morning. Oh well. So thank you for joining us for our second talk of the day from where we're sitting in the Pacific Daylight Time Zone. Some of you have joined us twice today, which is amazing. And for those of you who are watching on YouTube, you'll get to enjoy 2 uploads today.
Or dread 2 uploads today.
Or dread them, yeah. We do have that thumbs down guy.
Yeah.
So we have a really fun topic today that is pretty close to my heart. That is the exploring the in-between. But before we get to that, we have to do the YouTube spiel.
All right. So here's the YouTube spiel, everyone. Please, 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 if you are watching us on YouTube and you haven't already, subscribe to our channel. Because that way you'll get to know if you hit the little button down below with the bell, you will be advised when we put things up. And we're putting a lot more stuff up this year. There's going to be talks and interviews and all of the fun things. And we would love to have you subscribe. And if you like what we're doing, give us a thumbs up. If you hate what we're doing, give us a thumbs down. We're good for any feedback. And if you make a comment, it's possible that a duck will come down and give you $100. Stranger things have happened.
Stranger things have happened, it's true. And for those of you who did not catch us on our earlier talk today, we are doing 2 separate talks. So we have our regular Sunday talk within the Nine-Sided Circle, and then we have what we are facetiously calling our other talk within the Nine-Sided Circle, which is happening every 3rd Sunday at 10:30 a.m. in the morning here in Pacific Daylight Time Zone.
Yeah, which is 6:30 p.m. on Greenwich Mean Time.
Yes. And this talk, the one we're doing right now, is most convenient for folks who are either on the Pacific Rim or are in North or South America. But our other talk is more convenient for folks who are in Europe, who are in Asia, or who are in Africa or the Middle East. So you can come to both, whatever works for you. We just want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to be here live and to contribute with us in a way that allows us to have a lot of dynamism and bouncing ideas off of each other. That means a lot to us, and we think the whole community benefits from that. So.
And that way we don't have to be the only smart ones.
That's very true. Yeah, that's not really our jam. You know, this is meant to be a teaching time, but also very much a conversational time. Yep.
So there you go, the spiels and everything.
So
shall we talk about the in-between?
Yeah. Okay. So this idea came to me because I had been reading a lot about this concept of there being kind of a liminal space between things, in the sense that when we are engaging in the world, every engagement is kind of an interplay between different bodies, different ideas, different spaces, all of those things. So we're going to be touching on that this evening in a very kind of broad-reaching sort of way. So Mushtaq, I would love if you would help us just kind of get the ball rolling. I know I have a lot to say, but
well, let me tell you about how I discovered this, because it's an amusing story.
Sure.
This was back somewhere in the late 1960s. I was hanging out with a witch, and we knew she was a witch because she floated, and we were actually on a pond at the time. And we got to talking folk music and such things. And Simon and Garfunkel had just come out with their cover of Scarborough Fair, which is a very, very old song. And she turned to me and she said, "You realize, don't you, that that song is actually a spell?" And I'm like, "What?" She said, "Think about the lyrics. Think about the lyrics to this, because um, what they're doing is evoking that space between things. And she said that is an essential aspect of Celtic magic, the in between, finding the place in between the salt water and the sea strand.
Mm-hmm.
That thin edge that allows you to touch a different reality. And I've been thinking about that ever since, which is another way you can know that she was a witch. She put a spell on me, and I have never, ever forgotten that.
Yeah, yeah. And we've definitely touched on that, not only in our one-on-one conversations with each other, but we tapped into that in the work that we do collectively here in the Nine-Sided Circle. I love teaching this song to my students currently because I feel like we get to make it into a practice, not just learning a song, not just working on mechanics and all that, but really feeling into the words themselves and what they're trying to convey on a deeper level. And I don't know, I think maybe we should share some of the lyrics to that. What do you think?
I think that we should. And I think that by we, I mean you.
Of course. Yeah. So a lot of you will know the Simon and Garfunkel version, but I like to utilize a more traditional version, in the sense that there's a bit of old school language in it. But anyway, I guess I could sing it.
You could sing it. I love it when you sing it.
Okay. All right. Let me wasn't planning on it, but I feel like I can do this. So let me just get my first note.
In the key of G for G, this is cool.
Dang, my volume isn't working. There we go. Okay. Are you going to Scarborough Fair? Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. Remember me to one who lives there. Once she was a true love of mine. Tell her to make me a cambric shirt, parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, without any seam nor needlework. Then she'll be a true love of mine. Tell her to wash it in yonder dry well, parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, with never strung water, no rain ever fell. Then she'll be a true love of mine. Tell her to dry it on yonder thorn, parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, we've never bought blossom since Adam was born. Then she'll be a true love of mine. Ask her to do me this courtesy, parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, and ask for like favor from me. Then she'll be a true love of mine. Have you been to Scarborough Fair? Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. Remember me from one who lives there. For once he was a true love of mine. Ask him to find me an acre of land, parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, between the salt water and the sea strand. Then he'll be a true love of mine. Ask him to plow it with a lamb's horn, parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, and sow it all over with one peppercorn. Then he'll be a true love of mine. Ask him to reap it with a sickle of leather, parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, and gather it up with a rope made of heather. Then he'll be a true love of mine. When he has done and finished his work, parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, ask him to come for his cambric shirt, for then he'll be a true love of mine. If you say that you can't, then I shall reply, parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. Oh, let me know that at least you will try, or you'll never be a true love of mine. Love imposes impossible tasks, parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, but none more than any heart would ask. I must know you're a true love of mine.
Well, damn. It's been a long time since I've heard the whole version of that song.
Yeah. And the important thing about this song is that there's a narrative being woven through the lyrics. We have two individuals, in this case, a man and a woman, and they are sharing their feelings for each other through this narrative about impossible tasks. And these are things like making a cambric shirt, which you cannot make without seams. And it is, by its nature as a cambric shirt, it involves embroidery, sewing, all of these things. So to ask someone to make you one of those without those aspects to it, that's an impossible task. And then we get into this motif of the well. The well is a very important image in Celtic stories from the Northern Isles of Europe, because a well is a meeting place of this world and the next world. And a well without water, of course, is a bit of a paradox. It's never had water, it's never had rain fall into it. How do you wash a shirt in a well like that? And then we have the image of hanging the shirt on a thorn. a blackthorn bush, as Mushtak informed me the other day. And this is a growing thing. This is a living, growing thing that we would imagine has gone through its process of blossoming and expanding and deepening its roots and all these things. And yet we hear that it has never blossomed. It's basically been like an ever-existent blackthorn. Since Adam was born, that's a metaphor for going back beyond recorded history. And then on the woman's side, we have her saying, I want you to find me some land where the sea and the sand meet.
An acre of land, no less.
Yes. Yep.
And that's something that goes back to the oldest Welsh tales, interestingly enough. Yeah.
Say more about that.
Well, it's been so long since I've read them, but I remember that there was a particular villainous individual who could not be killed. He could not be killed on land, nor could he be killed on the sea. And so the hero of the story managed to get him literally at that edge where the sea and the land met. And one foot was on land and one foot was on the sea, and was able to kill him and save everybody. And everybody had a happy ending, except for the guy who got killed.
Hooray. Yeah. So continuing the story, we have her saying, okay, once you find that land, I want you to not only plow the land with a ram's horn and
a lamb's horn, isn't it?
yes.
Yes. A lamb's horn.
That's, if I said rams, that's because I've heard it wrong, but I know that it's lamb's horn. And lambs don't typically have horns yet.
Yeah.
They're babies. They don't have horns. So that's a bit of a mystery there too. And sowing an entire acre of land with one peppercorn, how could that be done? Mysteries.
Yeah. And if you've ever tried to cut anything with a piece of leather, you know, reaping all that is going to be interesting.
Yeah. So that sense of impossibility being an open door to this in-between space of possibility, that's an important piece to this song.
Now, let me ask you, for those of you who have been working with us for a while, what can you think of that as a practice that involves the in-between space?
This is good question.
The void might.
Yes, the void would.
Definitely.
The void practice is predicated on this idea, because the void practice asks you not to look at the objects, but on the spaces between the objects. And it is based on the same idea. And it is something that completely changes your perception of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Where else might we find this in our practices? Don't everybody answer at once.
Within the breath practice, the holding of the breath is this in-between space between.
The pause between exhale and inhale is, in fact, the in-between space.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And we're going to talk more about, you know, that slowing down aspect of that pause and that practice as a whole. It is meant to kind of expand the spaces between moments in a way. And we will be talking about that in a little bit when Mushtak gets into more physical practice oriented stuff around this topic.
I'd rather hear you sing again, personally.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. I think I've done enough showing off for the evening, though.
Oh, come now. I want you guys to know that it took me 6 years to ever get her to sing in front of me. And then she sang on a recording on her phone and emailed it to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I promised him I would do it. Yeah.
Yep. So you are all incredibly privileged, though you don't know it.
I mean, the anxiety was real, but I actually feel better after having done it. So that's cool.
So we have said the in-between is where the magic happens. And this is in particular true in movement. Now, one of the things I talk about oftentimes is when you look at things like the old martial arts manuals, you know, you go back and for those of you who have seen Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, you remember the secret Wudang manual, right? And Jade Fox steals it and she looks at it and she looks all the pictures and she makes all the postures in the pictures and she doesn't really get the art. And the reason that she doesn't is because the postures are beginning points and end points within a movement, but the magic happens in between those spaces. And so her disciple was able to figure that out and so surpassed her teacher. I wish I could claim the knowledge of having come up with this, but I learned this from my first Tai Chi teacher. He said, take your hand, put it here. Now put it here. Now put it here. Now put it here. What do you notice? And after a while, he gets us to realize that we have a tension on our hand here and a tension on our hand here and nothing in between.
Mm-hmm.
And this is standard movement for people. What he got us to do is to infuse that in-between space between the start and stop of a movement with our awareness. Because that way, as we're moving, if we encounter a force, we learn to move around it instead of having to bounce off of it or stop or reset.
Do you think push hands is part of that?
Push hands is definitely part of that when done correctly. It's not the only way you can learn it.
Yeah.
You know, remember I had started sending David to contact improv dancing because he's a dancer. He's not a fighter.
Mm-hmm.
But it gets you the same thing of learning to flow with the energy of the in-between.
Yeah. Or I think of a couple different things, but one thing I'm thinking of is doing that practice with like a tree branch and just kind of bending along with it while still maintaining contact and not letting it fling me in the face.
Yes.
But there is definitely kind of a tuning into subtlety there, as opposed to trying to project my expectations onto what the branch is doing. Yep. And the other one I'm thinking of is, sometimes altered states allow you more access to the sensation of that movement from one gesture into the next.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the opportunity to experience that a couple years ago. And I think that was my wake up to this. I don't think I had really attuned to that previously. And that just goes to show that like teacher substances do sometimes offer those opportunities to learn something new, as opposed to just giving you another opportunity to create stories about what's happening and lots of drama and weirdness and all that. And I really value that experience. I think it was alongside breath practice and void practice, a good taste of what we're talking about here.
Now, one of the most useful in-between places that I ever learned about was, years ago. I was working with my Sufi teacher of the time, and he said, "You notice how you're always talking to yourself in your head, right?" And I'm going, "Yeah, what's up with that?" And he says, "That's just habit. So here's what you do. Let yourself think a thought. Now, find the space between that thought and the next thought and dwell there for as long as you can. Then you're going to think the next thought. then you find the next space. And as you go along, make those spaces longer and longer, wider and wider, taller and shorter, until the space is greater than the speech.
Yeah.
It took a week or two to get that one.
You can do
Yeah.
that between words, between ideas at large. Yeah.
Between all of the sounds in the world.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That gets spicy. Yep. So what do we gain when we do that?
Dave, what do we gain when we do that?
Perception into another place that also interfaces back into the place we were beforehand.
Yes.
Yeah. Mhm. It is kind of weird to talk about, isn't it? Yeah. But it's worth talking about because this is something we are all generally able to experience just in everyday situations and everyday activities. Yep.
Yeah. And eventually you come to the realization that all shapes you experience in the world are defined by the spaces between them,
Yeah.
which is something that the void practice is designed to eventually teach you. And you see that both externally in the world, which is very useful for moving in the world, and internally, because the shapes inside of you also have spaces between them.
Which can be sensed through that practice you were just telling us about.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. When I had that altered state experience, I was also experiencing kind of as in motion, when you have that slowness in which you can see every incremental move from one point to the next, I was also experiencing that internally. So there is a sense of emotional slow motion, in a sense, where I could watch myself shifting from one emotion or idea into the next gradually. And there's space between those things as well. And when we're looking for them, when we're sensing for them, we can discover them. And it becomes useful for the reasons that we're talking about.
Yeah. So you can, for instance, think of a chair in your mind, any chair, it doesn't matter what kind of chair it is. And once you have it well visualized in your mind, observe all of the space around the chair. Ignore the chair and just pay attention to the space. This will do strange things to you. If you do this long enough, you may pop out of this existence into someplace else. It's possible.
Yep. So be prepared for that, perhaps. But it's a worthy endeavor.
So these are the things that we teach to find this in-between space, to begin to use it. And you'll notice that as you get more and more in touch with the in-between, that there's seemingly infinite energy there.
Yeah. Tell us more about that.
Not much more to say about that.
Yeah.
It appears to be there. Sometimes you can tap into it. Sometimes you can't. If you can't, there are probably things in between you and the energy that you have
True
to
that.
see around.
Yeah. Yep. So, this is kind of weird, esoteric stuff. But it's one of those things where when you put in the work for yourself, you'll have a better understanding what the words are trying to describe.
Yeah. And there are lots of physical activities that can help you with this. The physical is, I think, one of the best ways to begin to learn this.
Yeah.
And, I experienced it all the time in fencing. One of the great fencing masters of the 14th century said, be where the sword is not. And this is great advice. If you get this down, you become a much, much better fencer. But that to do that, you have to pay attention literally to where the sword is not. You have to embrace that. And the sword will move through places where it wasn't before, and you'll notice, but you still want to be where the sword is not.
And that's a very tactile way to learn.
Yeah.
And that's what helps, because you're getting that tactile feedback of, oh, clearly I am in the space where the sword is because it just hit me. Yep. Yeah, we also wanted to touch on some of the relational aspects of this too. And
yeah, say something about that.
yeah, so if you'll notice in the I just want to reread the quote that I shared, because this kind of helps me verbalize where I would like to go with this relational aspect. So I quoted David Abram today from 2 of his books that he's written in the past few years. And the first quote is, "The friendship between my hand and this stone enacts an ancient and irrefutable eros, the kindredness of matter with itself." And another quote from a different book, but still tied certainly to the first one. "Such reciprocity is the very structure of perception. We experience the sensuous world only by rendering ourselves vulnerable to that world. Sensory perception is this ongoing interweavement. The terrain enters into us only to the extent that we allow ourselves to be taken up within that terrain." And I think for him, he's speaking, of course, more broadly, but if I recall correctly, the context was such that he was talking about the relationality between humans and what we consider the inanimate world. And the way that he conceptualizes this is that when we take in stimuli, we are receiving the qualities of the thing that we are observing. So when we touch something with our hand, that's an interaction between our hand as a sensory organ and the qualities being given by the thing that we are touching and able to perceive. So in a way, I feel like this ties into human relationality in addition to the general in-betweenness of relationality in the world, in that when we are interacting with someone we care about, are we receiving them in our senses and in our consciousness as though we are kind of getting fresh input from them? Or are we acting from our perceptions about them, the things that we think we already know, the things that we assume about them, the stories and the baggage that we have carried inside of us? And also for them as well, to what extent are they receiving us in a way that is instantaneous and responsive to the context of the moment and all the sensory inputs that are coming in at that time? I think it's pretty miraculous when 2 people can come together and sense each other in that moment. There becomes this in-betweenness where you aren't acting from your baggage, you aren't acting from your stories about one another, and you join in that in-betweenness. Does this make sense?
Feel free to nod up and down or shake your head. Or,
yeah. All right, Dave has to go. That's cool.
Dave, thank you for stopping in.
Thank you very much, Dave.
So, does that make sense? Think of the thoughts and conceptions you have about the other person as objects that are cluttering the space. And if you remove them, you have a direct or a more direct experience of the person without the objects.
Yeah, and I have to say, this is something that is happening all the time. We are always receiving sensory inputs. It's just how conscious are we of them? And we are always going to be limited by the biological limitations of our bodies as well. So there's lots of sensory input coming in. Our brains interpret it, of course, and then we make some conceptual understanding from there. But there's still this different quality to that when we are participating in the moment as opposed to acting from story and from previous experience and from strong feelings we have about an argument that we had earlier in the day, that kind of thing.
All right, folks, what do you think? Talk to us. We've been talking at you for all this time.
Jonathan, what do you got to say?
I did want to make a comment.
Sure.
When you started to sing, something in me was scrambled because I had not, my comfortable picture of you, Nor, was not of someone who could sing, let alone sing in a very beautiful, moving way. And I had to reevaluate you. And it wasn't something I was able to do in seconds. It took me really throughout the song. I was constantly reevaluating who is this Noor, and what does it mean that she's singing like that, and what does it mean that it's affecting me in this emotional way. And so I'm a little now, I don't know you so, like in the way I thought I knew you. That's really all I wanted to say.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that. First of all, I really appreciate you. I guess we could say, first of all, challenging your preconceptions is always a good thing. I feel like there's a lot of growing for both of us to be done there. And I appreciate you sharing that with me because I kind of feel like that's an example in real time of something perhaps taking you out of the narrative and into a sensory experience. And it may not have felt like that at the time, but the fact that it was kind of feeling like a bit of a shift for you, it feels like you were having an experience of that shift inside of yourself. And yeah, I think that it can be challenging for us to do that in pretty much every scenario in which we find we have a level of comfort with the thing that we're interacting with. I definitely don't mean to say this about you personally, but I feel like even with a stone that we've spent a lot of time interacting with, and we've touched it and held it, and we think we know everything about it, and yet sometimes we might come to it on a different day or at a different moment in our lives and how we're feeling and everything, and it just feels like a new meeting of something as simple as a stone. And I'm not quite sure where I'm going with this, but I think my point is basically that when we meet another entity in the in-between space, we are likely to meet them anew on every occasion. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Chris, what do you got to say?
Well, first I was just waving hi, but a few things in your song, Nor, like the experience of not knowing where it's going next. There's a kind of mystery to it, and later Musa King, and so to feel into that space of knowing what I had heard just a moment ago into like, okay, now where is this going? It was like quite the visceral experience. And then I'm also reminded of the law of three and the reconciling force, and how that plays a role within.
Yeah. So do you have a question about how it plays a role? Is that what you mean?
Or an answer?
Yeah, I mean, you might just feel like you have a sense for that, in which case it would be awesome if you might be comfortable sharing your insights on that.
But just seeing the role of the in-between space as bringing about potential, and seeing the reconciler as like bringing into a higher potential. And so just seeing the connection between those is seems significant, and you know, how to apply that, I think, is another question. But maybe that's the question, is like, how might we apply this in our daily lives?
Yeah. I'll have some thoughts in a sec, but do you have any thoughts, Mushtaq?
On how to apply it in our daily lives?
Yeah.
Mostly the stuff that I mentioned, the practices that we do, are all really useful ways to do this. Movement practice especially. You know, learn to fill the in-between with your awareness in movement. And singing is good.
I mean, I definitely experience a sense of flow when I, especially when I'm singing for myself alone. It feels very connecting, and it gets me checked out of my own shit and better acquainted with this place. You know, we talk about it as a place. It kind of is. It's definitely sort of in not everyday consciousness, especially when we think about it in terms of what emerges when we're doing breath practices that allow for those pauses and those expansive moments. But I think even simpler things on top of course, breath practice, physical stuff, the void practice, it can be as simple as, let's say there's a place in your house where you feel, it doesn't have to be like the vibe is literally different on some metaphysical level, but if it helps you think in a different direction, if you feel like you write differently when you sit at your table as opposed to at your desk in your bedroom, or there's a particular place that gives you sparks of inspiration because it just makes you, it feels like a quirky space. It could be perhaps when you go for a walk and you come across like a location on your walk where you feel like things are just a little out of your ordinary. They shake you up a little bit. They make you think sideways or change your perspective somehow. I think things like that can provide the shock that can give you better access to the in-between. Yeah. So Chris elaborates, okay, here's a better question. How do we use the in-between to float like the witch does?
That's a good question.
Yeah, how do we get in touch with her?
That's a really good question. Who knows where she is? She's maybe has gone through the veil and off into the void. A long time ago.
Yeah. Well, she's still teaching us now, nonetheless.
Yes, it's true.
That's how this works.
So to answer your question, a witch floats because she has removed so much of her baggage that she's very, very light. That's my theory.
So lucky. Yeah. I don't
have an
float
answer.
yet, for the record. What?
I have an answer to Chris's
Yeah.
question. So I like to walk in the forest, and especially on a rainy day when there are a lot of puddles on the path. Some of these puddles can be very large, and they are perfectly still, no ripples on them.
Mm.
There are three ways to look at the water. One is I look right through the water to the ground underneath, and I see the sticks and just different things. Or I can look in the water itself. There are things floating in the water, insects swimming in the water. Very different to looking through the water. But my favorite is to look on the surface of the water at the reflection of the trees and the clouds above. As I'm walking along, I feel like I'm floating in the sky, walking in the sky.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite things too. And you mentioned another good in-between space. That's kind of like the place where the woods meet the more populated area. You know, there's like this, I think the technical term for it is the urban wildland interface, but it's a liminal space, and it has, in Celtic tradition, this magic to it as a result of being that in-between region, where you have wild animals interacting with domesticated humans in such a way that they're forced to live together in the same space, and all kinds of quirky things emerge from that. And lots of stories take place with someone leaving the village to go into the woods, and that passing into the woods is crossing a threshold. So that's a common motif.
Palin, any thoughts? I'm going to pick on you.
Two thoughts, actually.
Lay it on us.
The first one was when Kyle was talking about relational or between interactions between people. And I feel like the in-between space there might be in between the stories. So when we talk about like that space between thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
The space between the thoughts about the stories of this person.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking about that. The second thought was more for, I guess, like what I'm my own physical project right now, which Shuri and Mishtak knows very much about, the letting go of tension. And so I'm trying to map the concept of in-betweenness to tension release and relaxation. I have some baby thoughts there, but like I feel like I should just like ask Mishtak and Shuri, since you're both here, about like what are your thoughts about it?
Shuri, what are your thoughts about it?
I knew you.
Of course I'm going to do that.
Of course you are. And yes, I was listening the whole time. The Milan was coming up with all these challenges, and I said to her, the body, mind, spirit thing, we separate them to learn, but it's the one being, being. I just kept saying that, one being. And that to me is the most important thing. And I was thinking about fascia. We used to consider it an inert substance, and yet it is the most wonderfully innovated spacer between our muscles and our bones and our different organs and tissues, and having that and seeing space as this wonderful thing instead of an inert substance, an inert position or separator of things. It is not actually separate. And when you can dive into that, and it's this immersion feeling that I get,
That's awesome.
I could be wrong.
Well, I mean,
I don't think you are. Years ago,
holistically speaking, it has to be part of the whole. Yeah.
yeah, years ago, I learned a Tibetan meditation that involved visualizing your fascia as being empty, hollow, like balloons moving through your body, and sensing them that way. And what you come up with is that you don't have these muscles that are covered with this tissue. You have this really intricate maze of canals and conduits moving through your body that's often filled with things like muscle and tendon. And without the fascia, you'd just be a blob with some bones sticking out.
But the tension is also a good thing to help you recognize where you are and what you're doing and what you're privileging. I love that word, because our habits are that we are choosing a certain way of being, a certain way of habit, talking, interconnecting, and then when we recognize the habit, we can let that go and transform it. That's a good word. Not actually get rid of it, but as in transforming it into something else that we can use and still embrace the beingness of ourselves.
Yeah, and tension wants to be appropriate. Your body is a balance of tension members, which include your tendons, your ligaments, your fascia, and compression members, which include your bones. And like any other tensegrity structure, when that is in balance, there is a certain tension that holds everything in its shape. And when you move your body as if it is a tensegrity structure rather than a stack of bricks, then the movement goes through all of you. And that's something that Phelan and I were working on just this last week. Do you remember that, Phelan?
Yeah. Actually, one of the things that I just this past week told myself for me to snap out of the I'm tense everywhere is to remind myself that I am not a compression structure. And the moment I can verbalize that to myself, you're not a compression structure, it's supposed to be a tensegrity structure, then I can feel like the different parts of my neck and my back kind of just like loosen up a little bit.
Awesome. Yeah, it's funny how just those shifts, those reframes, you and I have talked about reframes before, but they can make such an immediate difference in how we feel in our situation or in our bodies. Yeah, so that's really cool, Phelan.
Zainab, any thoughts?
Some little comment about, I think I was with you, Mushtaq, the time you mentioned that the union is inevitable. And I just realized, we humans tend to be afraid of that, that space. And as soon as I realized, it's inevitable, it's gonna be if you want that. So it's inevitable.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Zainab. Yeah, that reminds me of a thought I had today that now I'm suddenly reminded of, that I think we do, to some extent, most of us have this fear of the in-between space. And unfortunately, that ends up meaning that we don't get to share that with one another. We don't get to willingly enjoy the experience of sharing the in-between together. Of course, like I said, we're always in it, but when we open up to perceiving it, it's a whole different story.
Yeah.
How about you, Sydney? What's been on your mind?
Have you decided that we're completely insane, for instance?
It's possible.
Yeah.
I just keep getting brought back to the song and how the herbs were kind of breaking up the words. I I was thinking if there was any significance in the herbs.
Oh, yes.
There is, yeah.
Yeah. Those herbs are part of the magical concoction that you would make.
Yeah, I think each
So-
of them has a traditional
Yeah.
purpose. Like,
Yeah. And each of them would represent one of the 4 elements.
yeah.
And of course, then there's the 5th element, which is the void.
Yep.
And each of them will represent certain other things, like rosemary represents memory.
Mhm.
And as it turns out, and this is a weird thing, smelling rosemary, you go out and you get fresh rosemary and you smell it like that, it will actually enhance your memory for a few minutes. This is now science. It isn't witchcraft anymore.
Witchcraft and wizardry.
Yes. Sage, as we know, is purifying.
Yeah. Long history on both sides of the Atlantic with that.
Yep. Time. Oh, I have to think back so far for some of this stuff.
Yeah, I unfortunately don't remember. So
We'll get back to you on the last 2 words.
yeah, I think we'll look that up and we'll get back to
Yeah.
you guys, or you guys can look it up and report back even.
Yeah.
But there is significance there to answer that question, very much so. Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, that song is how to cast a spell without getting burned at the stake.
Mm,
Or actually, not a spell, an enchantment.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a very old song that has evolved over time, and yet it all typically reflects this sense of liminality in all its iterations.
So that's pretty much all I got.
Yeah, same. I feel like we've touched on a lot of cool stuff. I was feeling really good about this topic, and I'm so glad that we got to
Yeah.
utilize it tonight and have fun with it.
Yeah. Palan notes that time will
Yeah.
increase your immune system and keep pests away.
Yep. I mean, I have it in a disinfectant spray at our house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And parsley is also clarifying.
Mhm.
It will actually purify your body.
Yeah.
Or so they say. And it also looks really good on your salad.
For your tacos.
Yeah. I've never put parsley on my tacos.
Oh, not parsley. I'm thinking
That's
of cilantro.
cilantro.
I know this. I know
Yeah.
this.
No parsley on the tacos.
It's been a long day.
Cilantro and onions.
Yep.
Yeah.
Got it.
And pickles if you want to get crazy. But
Oh man.
I'm telling you, it's the way to go.
Pro tip from Chris. All right. Well, does anyone have any last thoughts they want to share? Questions? Nope.
Yeah, I was
Sure,
thinking
Nancy.
about the thing with the stone in the hand,
Yeah.
and how, of course, a hand and a stone are made of the same stuff fundamentally.
Yeah. Hmm.
And I got a much better relationship with this chair. It and I
Yes.
are not divided.
There you go.
You know what? I had this really weird awakening moment where I was listening to like some random fact thing, and they were talking about how much DNA we have in common with bananas, and it was just like poof, oh my god, bananas are cousins. And we can't stop there though, because we're all made of the same stuff when we get down to the elements and whatnot. So I mean, even though we like to think of rocks as just like inanimate things that sit over there and don't really have any meaning for us, we are made of the same things. We do have a relationship with them in that way that is extremely primal. And that goes for chairs, that goes for our computers, and our cars and buildings and all of those things, because we all share matter in common.
But particularly for those things that we can touch.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about that, and my whole life I've studied primitive technology.
Yeah.
And when you use a rock as a pounding stone or as a knife, it melds with your hand. There is a marriage there. Or when you make something like an atlatl is a thing that you throw darts with, long darts. That's what they hunted with before bows. The last time I made one, it stayed in my hands for weeks. You know, it literally, I would have it around and pick it up and touch it and move it around and have a feel for it until it married my neurology.
Yeah. And that ties back to this interaction via perception and sensory systems that is taking place. Yeah.
Yeah.
A marriage in the in-between.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Nancy.
Welcome.
I'm glad you have a positive relationship with your chair.
I have switched us back to Brady Bunch mode.
Great. That means we can wave goodbye to everyone who's watching on YouTube.
So, folks, thank you for coming, and we are going to end the recording now. So, bye to everybody.